Welcome to Discover the Rows. Join our circular journey through an urban landscape that is unique in the world. Chester's historic four main streets are built on the foundations of the Roman fort Diva Victrix, and they're bounded by a precious network of buildings that will lead you down the centuries, from medieval times to the present day. These multi-storey terraces are lined with medieval fabric, which peeps through here and there. And their outer clothing is a fashion show of architectural styles of the past 800 years. Yet, there's something very rare about their design. They have open galleries at the first floor level, known as a row. The history of the rows is much debated. Why do they exist? How were they organised? Who lived and traded in them? How did they develop? So we've taken great care to draw on respected research. Some say the rows were built on top of Roman rubble. Others believe that the medieval cestrians, as the locals are called, wanted to maximise retail opportunities within the confines of the city walls. So they decided to build skywards. There's even a theory that the rows were meant to guard against Welsh raiders. Even the term row is much discussed. Does it define just the open gallery or the whole building, including the chambers above and the cellar or undercroft below? For our purpose, we'll focus on the open walkway. The fire of 1278 might have contributed to the emergence of the rows. Their fame soon spread. The founder of Methodism, John Wesley, remarked how they kept him clean and dry in any weather. That's still an advantage appreciated by today's visitors. We continue to enjoy these rows as places to shop as well as sightsee. If our trail inspires you to find out more, there are books to browse and knowledgeable staff to speak to at the Visitor Information Centre and in the Public Reference Library in Story House. Both can be found on Northgate Street. Plus, you can take a guided tour with the Guild of Chester Tour Guides or with Roman Tours. Go to the Discover the Rows page on the Visit Cheshire website for more information. We recommend you start your journey at Eastgate Street Row South, but you can also follow our trail, in part or in full, from any of the 6 starting points. At the Eastgate and Watergate corners, the White Friars end of Bridge Street Row West, Watergate Street at Trinity Street, and at the start of the covered walkway on Northgate Street. Onwards. Eastgate Street Row South. Eastgate Street is one of England's great streets, short and wide like a festival arena. So said Sir Nicholas Pevsner in the Cheshire volume of his seminal architectural chronicle, The Buildings of England. Take a walk along Chester's main shopping street and you can't help but sense the grandeur he describes. The starting point for this section of our trail is just outside the Grosvenor Shopping Centre on Eastgate Street. The city walls and Eastgate with its ornate clock are must-sees on your general exploration of the city. But turn your back on them now and head on to the row. Go forward, following in the footsteps of centuries of promenaders. Keeping a haughty eye on the street scene below, browse the elegant internal gallery of this impressive parade of Tudor Revival and classical gems. All the composite parts of these curious historic structures are present in this light and spacious row, and on a grand scale. Your feet pass over wooden boards, flagstones and tiles. The ceilings above your head rise and dip, sometimes bearing bold geometrical patterns. Ahead snakes the long walkway, punctuated by arches hung with shop signs. On your left are the shop fronts, some double-bayed. On your right are the stall boards, the large slabs of wood, tile or stone between the balustrade and the passageway. They're bookended by glass cabinets and sometimes make way for glass and wood booths that form miniature shops. All these tools have provided generations of traders with ways to display and sell goods. At the row's edge, the balustraded open arches look over the street, while also framing beautiful scenes of the historic buildings opposite. The centrepiece of this row is the department store Brown's of Chester. You'll find it at number 36. The Brown's shopping experience is long gone, but still fondly remembered by locals, especially for the fact that people would dress up to go shopping in its hallowed halls. The building developed over the years from 1828 as an unlikely architectural coupling of the unfussy Greek Revival and the florid Victorian Gothic styles. You can admire these at street level. Customers were invited to enter the store with a dash of swank. Imagine skipping up the wide flight of steps, passing between the sentry-like columns and pushing open the large entrance doors just to pick up some underwear. Beyond Brown's, the row continues to rise gently. Stop for a moment at the doorway to number 32, now Mappin and Webb Jewellers, to study an exposed section of wattle and daub wall encased in glass by the front door. The wooden shop fronts, booths and stall boards in this stretch are particularly polished, and the balcony arches open wide to offer big views of the red sandstone hulk of St. Peter's Church. You can learn more about that scene on the Eastgate Corner and Bridge Street Row East section of our trail. The row ends at Eastgate Corner, the start of the next part of our circular journey through the Chester Rows. Eastgate Corner and Bridge Street Row East. Our starting point is the Eastgate Corner of the Cross, where the old city's four main streets converge. This was the heart of Roman Chester. The ancient fort is buried beneath your feet. It's been an important meeting point for centuries. The high cross at the centre of this staggered junction, from where a busker might be serenading you today, is a version of the 14th century original that was pulled down by the parliamentarians during the English Civil War. The red sandstone cross was only restored to this spot in the 70s, and the version you can see dates from the mid-20th century, although the lantern head is thought to be a remnant of its predecessor. Now study the grand architecture of the Eastgate Corner and the opposite Watergate Corner. The glorious black and white Eastgate Corner is one of Britain's finest examples of Tudor Revival architecture. It's a style popularly used throughout the Rows and the wider city. Go down the steps to the street for a moment to take in its full effect. From this vantage point, look across at Watergate Corner. It's quite different, dressed in stone and diapered brick with Baroque and Renaissance flourishes. Black and white timberwork is only visible at its top floor, and that looks like it has been lent by its neighbour. Yet both designs were the work of the same Victorian architect, Thomas Lockwood, for the first Duke of Westminster, and they were constructed within the same decade at the end of the 1800s. In sharp contrast, the north side of the square is dedicated to the single edifice of the hefty red sandstone church of St. Peter's. Notice its entrance is at row level. Some historians think that this is because it sits on the remains of the Romans' headquarters building. The crossroads might even be staggered to circumvent the ancient HQ. This is indeed the heart of the fort, Diva Victrix, founded in AD 79. Chester was even once considered for the Romans' capital, a strategic stronghold on the front line of the Celtic Badlands. Now return to row level and turn your attention to the shops that wrap around the Eastgate Corner of the row. Here you'll discover a miniature jewellery quarter. Chester is famed for its silver, first made here in the 1570s. The city was just one of a few places in the country to have its own stamp. You can find out more about this in the Ridgeway Silver Gallery at the city's Grosvenor Museum. There are several long-standing independent jewellers in the city, and here you'll find some of them, including Low & Sons at number 11 Bridge Street Row. It was established by one of the families that dominated silversmithing from the Victorian era, and Powell's, at number 2 Eastgate Row, is Chester's oldest family-run antique jeweller. Step inside the beautiful Victorian interior of Low & Sons and climb the stairs to browse the jeweller's private museum. It displays some fascinating exhibits and stories from the firm's 250-year history. The tale of a curious connection with the ill-fated passenger liner the Titanic is just one. Continue south along this lively row, browsing its boutiques as you go. Perhaps pause to take a seat on one of the stallboards. The large slabs of wood, tile or stone between the balustrade and the passageway. In places, these stallboards have been turned to use as outdoor terraces by some of the cafes. You'll soon reach the grand entrance to the Edwardian-era St Michael's Arcade, which leads to the Grosvenor Shopping Centre. Continue forward to number 49. It's now occupied at row level by the restaurant Carbonara, but the original purpose of this half-timbered building was as the rectory for the nearby church of St Michael's. Look across the road at the opposite row and you'll glimpse some other interesting structures. The 17th century Dutch houses and the medieval 3 old arches. You can find out more about these buildings on the next section of our trail, Bridge Street Row West. Continue to the end of this row to find St Michael's Church, a 15th century place of worship that was largely rebuilt in Victorian times. It's now the quirky museum Sick to Death, which tells the gruesome history of medicine. The rows on both sides of this street once continued all the way down to the River Dee, but they have been lost in time, except for a few architectural clues. So cross Bridge Street and return to row level at the 3 old arches for the next part of our circular journey through the Chester Rows. Bridge Street Row West. This quiet corner of the Rows is also home to one of Chester's most historic buildings, the 3 old arches. The trio of simple spans might seem unremarkable, especially studied at row level, yet it dates from 1274 and has a few claims to fame. The 3 old arches is both part of the city's only surviving medieval row frontage and the largest known example of a stone-walled hall from the Middle Ages. It's also believed to be England's oldest shopfront. Look through any of the 3 arches for a fantastic view of the Tudor Revival building opposite. See its inscriptions, figurines and carved panels. They depict scenes from the Old Testament. You can get a really good view right by the balcony rails, because in this part of the row there are no stallboards, the large slabs of wood, tile or stone between the balustrade and the passageway. The building we're looking at was designed by the architect Thomas Edwards, who is thought to have been much influenced by Bishop Lloyd's house. You can discover more about that building on the Watergate Street Row South section of this trail. Back on the row, continue forward to hop over 2 tiny bridges that cross the tops of Pierpoint Lane and Commonhall Street before returning to the intimate atmosphere created by the row's low ceilings. Walk forward, heading north, below the low ceilings towards the Dutch houses at numbers 22 to 24. A trio of gabled buildings from the 17th century, the Dutch house's sense of self-importance is evident from its jettied facade, which juts out over the street. The Dutch reference hints at Chester's former role as a port. The Romans first established a harbour where you'll now find the Rudee racecourse. By the time this house was built, the fortunes of the rival port at Liverpool were on the rise. Chester's main business had been with Ireland, trading goods such as coal and cloth, but it began to make links with the Low Countries in an attempt to compete. At the shop Susie Kay's, one of the Dutch houses, the friendly staff will show you some of the original features. They include vast sandstone fireplaces and old timber beams with a seafaring tale to tell. You're now passing through the area once known as the Corvises Row, where shoemakers worked. It's one of several areas of the rows attributed to trades. Another example occupied the whole of the opposite row, which is believed to be the 16th century workplace of mercers who sold textiles. You've now reached Watergate Corner, where you can continue on the next part of our circular journey through the Chester Rows. Watergate Street Row South. Our journey through the rows continues at Watergate Corner, overlooking the Cross, the junction of the old city's four main streets. This is one of Chester's architectural highlights, just like the magnificent black and white Eastgate Corner across the square. Before you stands the High Cross, where the town crier calls, "Oh yay!" in the summer months. And beyond is St Peter's Church. You can find out more about this scene on the Eastgate Corner and Bridge Street Row East section of this trail. Now head west along Watergate Street, once the route to the port. You'll be treated to three of Chester's finest timber frame buildings on this stretch. The first is God's Providence House at number 9, its location revealed on the row by a beamed ceiling. As throughout our tour, you'll need to go down to street level or the opposite row to view facades of buildings. There's rich plaster decoration to admire here, and an inscription after which the house takes its name. God's providence is mine inheritance. This was a thank you from the owner for being spared the plague, which ravaged Chester's inhabitants in the late 17th century. We have the Victorians to credit for saving this building from destruction, although the revamp by the architect James Harrison, a champion of the Tudor Revival style, is said to be much bigger and bolder than the original. It's a common charge by critics, who feel the restoration efforts of Chester's Victorian architects were overblown. Pop into Harriet and Dee, the shop now occupying God's Providence House at row level. Climb the stairs to the upper showroom and you'll find some beautiful plasterwork of flowers and fruit on the cornice and ceiling panels, including the once much prized pineapple. Return to the row and continue forward to the next beamed ceiling, which announces the presence of Leach House. The first parts of this building appeared in the 1300s, and it has been tampered with in almost every century since. Check out the facade from street level. It features a Tudor beam carved with grapes and vine leaves, and the original Georgian windows. The date 1736 is scratched on one of the high-up panes. Go back up to row level to peep through the shop window and see one of the house's astonishing internal treasures, a huge fireplace on the east wall from the late 14th century. Its Tudor overmantel features Ionic columns and the Leach coat of arms. When the shop's open, you might be able to step inside to see the remains of a plasterwork frieze. Some say it carries a coded message about a clandestine visit to the city by Catherine of Aragon. The third jewel in this row can be found a little further along. Bishop Lloyd's house, at numbers 51 to 53, is in fact two properties. They were made into one in the 17th century and named after George Lloyd, Bishop of Chester from 1605 to 1615. The Victorian architect Thomas Lockwood, whose work we encountered at Watergate Corner, restored this property. He remodelled the row front to install the flight of steps that lead down to the street and replace some of the posts that support the chamber above. Look closely at the carvings on the bracket posts. Some of the bearded giants and beasts are Jacobean. Continue along this row to its end at the 17th century Ye Olde Custom House Inn. Then cross the road to the top of Trinity Street for the next part of our circular journey through the Chester Rows. Watergate Street Row North. If you're confused about why this leg of our trail begins at the junction of Watergate and Trinity Streets and not up on the row, walk east towards the High Cross to find out more. Observe the shops and houses on your left. Notice how they all have flights of stairs leading to their front doors. That's because the entrances are at row level. It seems we have been locked out of the row at this point because it has been enclosed. As you continue along Watergate Street, Take the chance to admire the buildings on your right too. What do you think of the brutalist design at 55 to 61 Watergate Street? The heavy concrete 20th century take on the rhythm of the surrounding historic architecture certainly divides opinion. From street level, you'll experience the true wow factor of Bishop Lloyd's house. But find out more about this building on the Watergate Street Row South section of our trail, because once you reach Crook Street on the left, it's time to join the row. The steps up to the row are steep here, and you'll emerge beneath one of the lowest ceilings in the network. There's even a sign urging caution to avoid hitting your head. Consequently, the arches here are more of a peephole onto the street below. Walk forward to pass through the front of Booth Mansion at numbers 28 to 34. Its span is identifiable by the two medieval arches, a recessed porch and a huge deep stallboard, the large slabs of wood, tile or stone between the balustrade and the passageway. Handsome Booth Mansion was built in 1700 for George Booth of Dunham, 2nd Earl of Warrington. After his death, it became the meeting place of local high society, with balls and other entertainment hosted in its assembly rooms. From street level, the Georgian brickwork and its cornice crown cloak two medieval houses. It's certainly a statement piece, the largest house on the street, with 8 bays and a parade of Tuscan columns. But the house also physically pushes forward into the thoroughfare, standing proud of its neighbours. It was even slightly angled so that it could be seen in perspective from the cross. Booth was fined for his effrontery to the tune of £10 and 5 shillings, about £1,000 in today's money. The tobacconist Hermaeus occupies the undercroft of Booth Mansion, a fascinating warren of vaulted stone rooms with some parts dating from the 1200s. The undercrofts on this street and the southern side of Eastgate Street are particularly deep, often accessed by steps. Several of the undercrofts on Watergate Street have been turned to use as atmospheric venues for bars and restaurants. Pop in and admire one of these structures at your leisure over a drink or a meal. Return to the row and continue forward. Just over a short bridge, pause to admire two buildings opposite, Leach House and further along, God's Providence House. You can find out more about these on the Watergate Street Row South section of our trail. The row ends by St Peter's Church, which we describe on the Eastgate Corner and Bridge Street Row East leg of the tour. But don't be tempted to join the street here. Retrace your steps briefly along the row to the alley signposted for St Peter's Churchyard. Dip down this cut-through to emerge in a courtyard that now doubles as a beer garden for a couple of pubs, so you could stop to quench your thirst. Long before this space was a churchyard, it was where Roman soldiers would gather to receive their orders and pay. Now go down either of the alleys that lead east out of the courtyard to Northgate Street and head to the City Club, the starting point for the next part of our circular journey through the Chester Rows. Northgate Street Rows and Eastgate Street Row North. The rows only encroach on Northgate Street briefly, and on the west side have disappeared altogether due to rebuilding work in the 19th century. This part of our trail begins at the City Club at number 1. The neoclassical building was formerly the commercial newsroom, which was built in 1807 by Thomas Harrison, who also worked on Chester Castle. Take a look at the plaque on the wall. The City Club stands on the site of the medieval Ironmonger's Row. The covered walkway ahead on the left sits just above the part-cobbled street. It is all that remains of a ramshackle row once populated by shoemakers. The row was lowered and the undercross enclosed in the 1800s. But all is not lost. Look up to see a confection of Chester's familiar black and white Tudor Revival buildings. There's work here by James Strong, Harry Beswick and John Douglas, the latter best known for his work at the Duke of Westminster's home, Eaton Hall, on the edge of the city. The pretty sweep of timber-framed gables with oriel windows is elaborately detailed. There's a multitude of patterns, including stripes, diamonds and spheres, fleur-de-lis and quatrefoils. Finials top the gables at the southern end. The supporting columns are variously designed. See the delicate laced wooden skirts hanging from the bay windows at numbers 9 to 13, now the shop Zara. Spot the carved statuettes of a woman, a knight and a pilgrim above number 7, now the Dr. Martens store. Outside Molly's traditional sweet shop, the Row's northern corner is decorated with colourful figurines, including a piper and a lutist. This invisible row also hides a secret for you to discover if you take a guided tour. In the basement of numbers 21 to 23, now Pret-a-Manger, you'll find original columns and bases from the Roman conquerors' headquarters building. Nip around the northern corner of the arcade, past the Dublin Packet pub and into the alley to find a viewing area of some of the excavated remains of the Roman strong room. The pay chests were kept under permanent guard at this underground treasury. Could this be Britain's oldest bank? Return to Northgate Street and climb the steps by Starbucks to Northgate Street Row East, then continue forward. This row was home to butter shops, bakers and cooks over the centuries. It also earned a few nicknames down the years. One was Pepper Alley Row, and a pepper became the term coined for a hooligan because of the rowdy crowd that frequented the area. Another was Broken Shin Row because of the uneven surface of the ground. The buildings approaching the corner of Northgate and Eastgate Streets were known as the notorious Dark Row. Here the path was obscured by a series of booths which replaced the stallboards, the large slabs of wood, tile or stone between the balustrade and the passageway. The effect was a dingy and secluded spot popular with lurking criminals. Several of these booths remain in place, although the area was opened up in the early 1990s. Read the tales from the rows on the information board at the Northgate Corner and enjoy the views of the cross and its surrounding historic architecture. You can find out more about this scene on the Eastgate Corner and Bridge Street Row East section of our trail. Now continue east along Eastgate Street Row North, a quiet stretch that offers brief respite from the bustle of Chester's main drag below. Stop at the Boot Inn, also the point at which the Dark Row ends. This was the Georgian home of a merchant, although it received a makeover in the 19th century. Walk a little further to find the entrance to Godstall Lane, a medieval alley that's very easy on the eye. Prettified by boutiques and bars, ornate hanging signs and ivy-clad walls, this is a pleasant place to take a break. Godstall Lane leads to St Werburgh Street and Chester Cathedral, another must-see. The colonnaded walkway at the street's northern end is called St Werburgh Row. It's a striking contrast to the architecture we've seen so far. Designed in 1935 by local boy Maxwell Ayrton, one of the architects of the original Wembley Stadium. Return to Eastgate Street Row East and take the stairs down to street level. Cross in front of the Eastgate and its famous clock to the entrance of the Grosvenor Shopping Centre. This is the start point for the next part of our circular journey through the Chester Rows. We hope you enjoyed our trail, Discover the Rows. To delve deeper into the history of the Rows, browse the local history publications in the Visitor Information Centre and Public Reference Library and Story House. Both can be found on Northgate Street. Guided tours are available with the Guild of Chester Tour Guides and with Roman tours. Information about disabled access is available on the Cheshire West and Chester section of www.accessible.co.uk. For full details and a written version of this trail, go to the Discover the Rows page on www.visitcheshire.com.